We can hear you. Hello. Um, I don't think he's started yet. They're just gonna wait maybe 2 or 3 more minutes to begin. Can you also please tell our French speakers how they can to click the button for interpretation and switch it to French? Nick? They don't know. Yes, they don't know yet to go. Just if you can tell it to everyone through the English channel first, because in French, because they don't know yet to change over. Um, and Yannick, can you tell them that in French on the English channel by clicking the button? Thank you, Yannick.
Hi, Yannick. Can you tell the participants in English first that if they want to listen in the language of choice, which will be French, they can switch on the translator mode, on the interpreter mode. So good Good afternoon, everybody. I
Julian,
think
I can't hear you if your mic sounds very, very low.
you can't hear me.
Now I can hear you when you're
Oh,
clear.
okay. I think we can start. Um, Good afternoon, everybody. Um, this is Kilian Banda from AFAP, and we welcome you all to our webinar on COVID-19 and fertilizer value chains in Sub-Saharan Africa, impacts and policy responses for West Africa. So uh, just some a little bit of a background, we did another webinar like this for East and Southern Africa 2 weeks ago. And it was an insightful webinar. So today's webinar, I think the program lineup, Dr. Wanzala will give us a welcome remarks and introduction, and a keynote address will be given by Dr. Innocent Okuku, WAFA President, and there will be a question and answer session, and we'll introduce a Mentimeter app where people can throw in their questions, and there will be the Ghana response, government response, and then there will be a Nigerian followed by a Nigerian one, and the Togolese one will close the presentations. So I will hand it over to Dr. Wanzala for a bit of a background of what is the MEFA and what we are trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you so much for joining us to participate in this webinar, which is titled COVID-19 and Fertilizer Value Chains in Sub-Saharan Africa, Impacts and Policy Responses, with a focus on West Africa. My name is Maria Wanzala, and I work for the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership, or AFAP. This webinar, however, is brought to you by a consortium called PEMEFA, the Partnership for Enabling Market Environments for Fertilizer in Africa. So just to give you some background, PEMEFA is a consortium of 5 organizations: AFAP, IFDC, the International Fertilizer Development Center, Michigan State University, New Markets Lab, which is a law firm out of the US, and RENAPRI, which is a regional network for agricultural policy and research institutions. So PEMEFA was formed in 2018 in response to the fertilizer crisis facing Africa, which we are all familiar with. In a nutshell, agriculture is the main economic sector in the majority of African countries. Now, although fertilizers are critical.
Hi, Dr. Wanzala, can you come close to your mic, please? I think people are hardly hearing you.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Although fertilizers are, I was saying that PEMEFA was formed in response to the fertilizer crisis facing Africa, which we are all familiar with. In a nutshell, although agriculture is the main economic sector in the majority of African countries, fertilizer use remains very low, and as a result, our agricultural productivity is suffering. Now, a key reason for the low fertilizer use is that we have very weak fertilizer markets, which are unable to deliver quality and appropriate fertilizers to our farmers in a timely manner. And our markets are weak because we lack a conducive enabling environment for the private sector. In many countries, there's little knowledge and understanding among our policymakers of how the regulatory systems that govern our fertilizer market impact the performance of the private sector. Oftentimes, these policies and regulations are quite discouraging to private sector participation. So PEMEFA was formed in July of 2017 with seed funding from Michigan State University's Alliance for African Partnerships. And the goal of PAMEFA is to transform African agriculture and livelihoods by improving smallholder farmers' access to and use of fertilizers, by establishing national and regional fertilizer policy and regulatory frameworks that will facilitate increased private sector investment and participation in fertilizer value chains. So the consortium has three key objectives. The first is to generate evidence to mobilize support for policy and regulatory reforms that will encourage private sector participation in markets. The second is to build the capacity of stakeholders along the fertilizer value chains to establish a conducive, enabling environment for private sector markets. And the third objective is to drive ongoing efforts to reform policy, legal, and regulatory regimes for fertilizer through outreach and engagement. So some of our key activities to date are as follows. We produced a synthesis report on the best practices for regulations, policies, and legal frameworks to create an enabling environment for the private sector in fertilizer value chains in Sub-Saharan Africa. We also held 4 lecture series at American and African universities on fertilizer policy and regulatory issues. We also contributed to a study on the impacts of the 2012 Regional Fertilizer Regulatory Framework for ECOWAS, its impact on fertilizer trade and use. And then we also conducted a literature review on best practices for public-private dialogues and took stock of the current PPDs for fertilizer in Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, as part of our continued efforts to disseminate PAMEFA's research and to engage with stakeholders on the importance of designing policy and regulatory systems that encourage private sector-led fertilizer markets, we have decided to take our message online and hold 2 webinars, one for East and Southern Africa and one for West Africa. And these webinars have 2 key objectives. One, to raise awareness of the impact of COVID-19 on the fertilizer industry and fertilizer value chains in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the second objective is to share policy responses that have been successful in other countries. So the PAMEFA consortium draws on its vast network to identify policymakers from several countries in East and Southern Africa to present during the webinars. And today we are pleased to present the webinar for West Africa. So today's webinar is comprised of 1 keynote speaker and 3 panelists, and you can see them on your screen. We are very excited about the caliber of our presenters, and we look forward to an interesting, interactive, and informative session. Again, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Without any further ado, I would like us to begin. Thank you. Our first presentation is our keynote, and it is to be made by Dr. Innocent Okuke from Nigeria.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Sorry, Innocent, I need to do some marketing for you first.
You want to sell me a little bit? Okay, go ahead, please.
So Dr. Okuke is the first Vice President and Coordinator for Programs and Partnerships of the West Africa Fertilizer Association, which is an umbrella organization for all the private sector players in the fertilizer industry who are operating within the ECOWAS region. He's also the Chief Executive Officer of Intrio Synergy Limited, which is a company based in Nigeria, and it focuses on the agricultural sector. He has over 30 years experience in the agricultural industry, spanning research, development, as well as commercial positions in both public and private organizations, including over 12 years in the fertilizer industry in Nigeria. Dr. Okuke is an alumnus of the prestigious London Business School, and he holds a doctorate degree in crop production. So please assist me in welcoming Dr. Okuke. Over to you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Maria. Such a pleasure for me to be here, and thank you for the privilege to give a brief keynote address, I would say. So would I be sharing my screen or someone else will be pushing the slides?
That's exactly what I wanted to ask. I will, yes. If you want me to share from this end, I will do that for you.
But if you can also give me a right to share, correct? Okay, but if you have then if you want to share, then go ahead. Maybe it's easier that way.
you'll be given the rights to share. James, can you give Dr. Innocent Okuku the rights to share his screen? Hi, Jimmy.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm working on this right now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you should be able to do this now.
Okay, so let me give it a try and see what we've got. Share screen. So can everyone see my screen?
It's starting. Yes, we can see it. Kindly put
Okay.
it. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, excellent. So thank you again for the privilege to speak at this very important webinar. I'm going to try to share a few information that I've gleaned from here and there over the period of this COVID-19 pandemic and some of the responses that we've seen in West Africa and the implication, including some lessons. So this is the outline of how my presentation will go. As usual, I'll speak a bit about WAFA. Since WAFA is still in its first decade, it's important to continue to remind everyone who we are. And then a brief overview of the COVID-19 pandemic, the way we see it, and drill down to how it affects our sub-region. And then talk about a few of the responses that we've seen, especially at the outset of the pandemic, and describe a little bit the impacts of the pandemic on the fertilizer sector across West Africa, some key highlights, and then some of the lessons that we have taken from there, haven't reflected a little bit. So now just quickly about WAFA. Like Dr. Maria had said, WAFA is an association of private sector operators in the fertilizer industry across the ECOWAS region. Our mission is to contribute to creating a wealthy West Africa through sustainable agriculture. We like to be the fertilizer industry platform for common voice and action to promote sustainable crop nutrition in West Africa, so that the development of the fertilizer industry or fertilizer use across West Africa is not left entirely in the hands of public sector, but at least private sector starts contributing actively. Today, our membership stands at 60, which includes manufacturers, importers, blenders, and distributors. So pretty much everyone who is in quote worthy of note within the space is part of the WAFA body today. Together, we represent more than 90% of the volume and value of fertilizers that are produced and distributed in West Africa, produced, imported, and distributed across West Africa. And cumulative, total turnover is in excess of $1 billion per year. And WAFA has got started in 2016, and we have 7 strategic objectives, basically to improve finance for the fertilizer supply chain, to work on improving the quality of fertilizers that are available across the sub-region, and then to also promote stewardship to ensure that people have better understanding of how to use fertilizers to get the kind of results that they should get out of their farms, especially with smallholder farmers, and to improve availability of fertilizer, distribution to the last mile. The vision is such that every farmer does not need to go beyond a 10 minutes walk, pick fertilizer. That's where we're hoping we'll be able to get fertilizer close to farmers, the way the bottle of Coca-Cola is close to consumers. We also intend to continue to push aggressively in regional integration, where ECOWAS countries become far more integrated, so that products that are produced in one country or available in one country is easy and readily accessed in the other country. And we use economies of scale to improve performance. There have been significant gap between public and private sector players in terms of communication, and WAFA intends to continue to promote that dialogue so that we are actually collaborating instead of working at cross purposes. And we set up information sharing platforms and structures to help disseminate key information about fertilizer. These are the 7 strategic objectives that WAFA is pursuing, particularly over a 5-year period starting from 2019 up to 2023. WAFA is led by a board of 9 people from across West Africa, including male and female. So that's a bit about WAFA I wanted to share. Now let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll start from a global level and then drill down a little bit to Africa and then zoom in on West Africa. Now, the chart to the left shows the daily increase rate of people who have tested positive to COVID-19 on a day-to-day basis. If you look at the way the curve goes, it's still on the increase. Since it started, it's been on the increase. It looked like it wanted to stabilize around late July into August, but then it's picking up again. And for yesterday, for example, 490,000 plus people were fresh COVID cases reported. So that's a global issue there. In terms of what numbers we're talking about, across the globe, we're talking about 52 million cases already identified. We're talking about a situation where 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million people have already died as a result of COVID-19. And we have, good enough, we have over 33 million recoveries recorded so far. But there's a huge number of cases, as you can imagine, between the 52 million and 33 million who are still actively in the process of care in hospitals or in isolation centers and all of that. Now, when one thinks about where are the worst hit locations, the 5 top countries with COVID are listed in the chart to the bottom right. United States leading the charge, followed by India, then Brazil, then France, then Russia. The reason why I put this chart is to be able to show that, first of all, in Africa, yes, there is COVID, but we're not as hit as some other parts of the world, for starters. But then we can't ignore it. Let's then look at the case for Africa-wide COVID situation. According to the report from Africa's Center for Disease Control, so far there's 1.9 million cases already reported, over 45,000, almost 46,000 deaths, over 1.6 million recoveries. Now, if you break that down according to the regions within Africa, worst hit Southern Africa region, followed by Northern Africa. West Africa is hit, but not as seriously as those regions. And then Central Africa is the least affected. Now, to look closely at West Africa, which is the area of our interest today, I decided to now look at the daily, how the curve looks like in some select countries. It's pretty much the same picture across West Africa, but I picked a few countries just to illustrate it. West Africa has seen 195,000 cases so far, almost 3,000 deaths, over 183,000 recoveries. But when you look at the chart, in Nigeria, for example, the numbers, daily infection rates or reporting rates were going up, went up in May into June, and started coming down up to August, has come relatively down. It's pretty much like flattening at a low level, much lower than what it was in the region of June to July timeframe. Now, if you then look at the case for Mali, it's a bit spikes and going down, but it's a bit more consistent between July up until September. There've been a few spikes again as we entered into late November, but I mean, this is it's not as bad as what we had in the July timeframe where we had some of those spikes. The Sierra Leone case is also had some up figures in June, and then it's a bit stable. And then you look at Senegal down there, Ghana here has a similar situation. So if you look at all of these countries, it shows that West Africa had its fair share of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're actually looking like we're coming towards a flat kind of curve that is not, it hasn't disappeared, but the numbers are not that threatening. So in summary, what it suggests or what it tells me is that our daily infection rates have dropped significantly across West Africa. But when you look across Africa and you compare the sub-regions, West Africa is actually not as seriously affected as you will have in North and Southern Africa. Now jumping now to look at when this pandemic was declared and people started responding, when index cases started happening across West Africa, what were some of the quick responses that we started to see in terms of policies and all of that? Now, the first thing is that once countries started recording index cases, countries began to implement local movement restrictions and border closures, which some people describe as lockdown and all of that. In most cases, it was done in phases, with countries starting with cities that the index cases were spotted in, and then expanding it gradually until the whole country had to be pretty much under restrictions. And then border closures also began by looking at restriction of people coming from countries that have shown significant levels of COVID, but gradually to a point where international travel almost was at zero, except for really critical cases of bringing in materials related to treating COVID-19 or medical related things. Okay, another thing that was commonly observed was that the nations quickly established coordination units and efforts to actually look after consistently how the COVID-19 can be suppressed, how it can be tackled. And all of this across the countries, you were getting daily tracking of the level of infection, tracking of people who have had contact with those who have the cases, and testing them to be able to track these positive cases and be able to have a better understanding, and isolating them to be able to reduce the extent of transmission. Also, countries then invested significantly in ramping up capacity to test for the COVID-19 virus. Now, the other thing which is very important is the fact that most of the countries quickly recognized certain products and services as essential, and were therefore not included in the items that were restricted from movement. They wanted to make sure that the movement restrictions and border closures do not limit these items because they were considered essential items for the survival of the country population. Now, included in these items were topmost food and medical items and related logistics. Now, while some countries were very clear from the beginning that fertilizer and agricultural inputs were seen as part of the food chain and therefore needed to be considered as essentials and allowed to move freely, some countries were not so clear. Even though they mentioned food, they didn't quite indicate that it covered fertilizer and some other agricultural inputs. So there was a bit of a disconnect at that beginning starting point. In response to some of those observations, WAFA then engaged with ECOWAS and some of the other partners that WAFA has, including IFDC and some other partners, to facilitate a clarification of those kind of positions across the countries where it had not been clearly listed that fertilizers were essential. Recognizing how this can affect food security, this intervention was critical. And good enough, ECOWAS was keen to work with us to quickly communicate to all countries across West Africa to clearly list fertilizer as essential, and therefore remove them from items that were restricted from movement. And therefore fertilizer businesses and fertilizer products were allowed to move essentially throughout the pandemic high points, or the period where the pandemic was really a serious issue. Now, these were the initial kinds of responses that we saw. I mean, there are a few more country specifics. I imagine that the panelists from each of the countries will speak about some of those specific interventions. Now, another thing that WAFA actively got involved in doing to ensure that up-to-date information about fertilizer availability and things related to fertilizer prices and market situation was available to policymakers to be able to adjust their interventions so that the sub-region does not fall into the trap of food crisis because of COVID-19. WAFA, together with a number of its partners, started to produce and circulate a weekly publication which was tagged West Africa COVID-19 Fertilizer Watch. I mean, on the right of that slide is a sample of that of the material, and I presume that many of the people on this conversation today would have seen copies of this circulated during the quarter of, I think it was more like second quarter of 2020, when this was actively being produced and circulated on a weekly basis. So the information was gathered weekly across the countries in West Africa, edited and published by a very professional team that was working aggressively to make this happen. And the content spread across having overall, assessment of the system of COVID-19, just providing updates, and then looking at where we stand in terms of fertilizer volumes and prices in each country, especially in comparison to what the usual consumption per year or the requirements on an annual basis of each of the countries are, to see how safe we are in terms of being able to meet the fertilizer requirement for production in the cropping season. And then also looking at the logistics and the related challenges or experiences on the ground in the course of the pandemic. And then also looking at the government policies and interventions that were brought on board to kind of help cushion the effect of the pandemic or rapidly get over the pandemic within the farming population. And then also with all of this data, we're analyzing and giving views about positions and the risks that we could fall into a food crisis as a sub-region. Also working with ECOWAS and other actors in the agro-input sector, including organizations like CORAF and associations in the seed and crop protection product sector. We were able to also have a monthly publication that looked at not only fertilizer, but a combination of all of these inputs and the situation in the sub-region. So these publications were quite useful because they then, to a large extent, contribute to helping policymakers to take, positions and see what needed to be done and what kind of interventions needed to be implemented as the pandemic situation evolved during that quarter. Now, what were some of the impacts that we saw, or the summary of the impacts that we saw that COVID-19 had in the course of 2020 cropping season, particularly, or fertilizer business season, particularly? The first one, the fact that the volumes of fertilizer that were available in the market were slightly reduced. I would say when the pandemic started, one had the fear that it will almost truncate fertilizer supplies, but really the impact in terms of volume there was some impact, but it was not huge. For example, as we were assessing the volumes available in each country as the season was walking towards us, we saw that consistently most countries had up to 70–80% of their annual requirements at the appropriate time, which is good in terms of relative to the fears that one had in terms of access to fertilizer. And I think this is also because fertilizer was quickly classified as an essential item, and therefore movement of the product across the countries within each of the countries in West Africa continued throughout the period of movement restriction. Now, there were a few countries that had specific challenges at certain times in the season for fertilizer access. One example that strikes me very well is the Nigeria case for a period of up to almost 2 months in the July, August into September region, where urea, which is a product that is manufactured within Nigeria, as a matter of fact, Nigeria is the only manufacturer of urea in the sub-region, became such a scarce commodity because of some indirect outcome of COVID-19 experience. The biggest producer had a COVID-19 related fatality, and therefore the plant had to be shut down, while at the same time, the smaller producer also had a challenge with operational challenges and was not producing. So for this period, there was a huge scarcity of urea, and that significantly affected pricing, as you will see in some other aspects of this presentation. Okay, now another key area to mention is the fact that there were significant delays in deliveries in country of these products resulting from logistical challenges. Now, because although the ports were allowed to still remain operational, but people had to go through quarantine period when they arrived with new vessels, the congestion at the port and the fact that they were social distancing led to reduced number of people who were working at the port during the time. That led to a bit of delay, first of all, at the ports, and then the movement of these products, even when they eventually get on trucks to villages and farming centers, was also delayed because pretty much a lot of inspection needed to be done to show that these products were products that were essential and allowed to move. And therefore, places that trips that normally would have taken maybe 1 or 1.5 days, some of them took beyond a week in terms of trucking to locations where the products were going to be sold by retailers. So there was significant delays in delivering products. And that's connected to the very next sub-bullet, which is that, travel time for trucks across the country is lengthened because of these enforcement procedures. And also because there were other goods and services many other goods and services were not except they were within the essential commodity category. What happened then was that there was a bit of an artificial scarcity of trucks in many countries because generally many truckers operate what you call reverse logistics in getting efficiency of the operations of their trucks. So they needed to be moving some other products from wherever they were taking fertilizer to back to the port countries or port cities so that they actually earn money both in forward and backward movement of the trucks. So when you have a restriction that limits the movement of many other products, it then means that the trucks tend to stay longer when they deliver fertilizer before they go back to where they are supposed to pick the next batch. So it kind of created a little bit of artificial scarcity of trucks along the supply chain. Now, there were also issues of higher prices of fertilizer at retail point. Of course, because there was artificial scarcity of trucks, prices of trucking went up, and therefore this also contributed to a situation where prices at retail point were higher. Apart from the situation where acute scarcity or huge scarcities, like I mentioned in the case of at some point in time in Nigeria, most generally price hikes were between 10 and 15% in many countries. But of course, in that particular case that I mentioned, prices of fertilizer at retail point went to beyond 120% higher than it normally would be at that time in the year because of the scarcity. And then there was increased difficulty in accessing fertilizers for farmers because people could not, movement was restricted, so to transport to locations to buy fertilizer was a bit more difficult than it would have been if there were no COVID-19 and related lockdowns. For producers who were blending and distributing fertilizers, there were increased costs, which are related to, a lot of which is related to COVID-19 protocol. So for example, when the COVID-19 protocols require that people social distance, so it means for operations that you would be able to put 150 people in the same facility to work in, you were restricted to maybe not more than 50 people. That's number one. At the place of operation, people were required to stay at least 2 meters apart. You had to put in place safety materials like hand washing, sanitizing equipment, all of those things, temperature gauge, tests for people to come in and go out of the premises. All of these are costs, and therefore they added to the cost of production. So people end up with higher cost of production on their hands for many of our members who are blending and distributing fertilizer. Workforce was also significantly scarce because movement was restricted generally. It was difficult for many workers to get to sites where they will support the production process in our companies, and therefore this also contributed to higher cost. Now, we've learned some lessons from here. Like I said, even though the impact was not so huge in summary, but by introspecting, we've learned a few lessons. The impact, I think that the impact of COVID-19 across West Africa fertilizer value chain was not huge due to a number of factors. The first one being that, the COVID-19 pandemic struck at a time that was actually outside the window where a lot of the deals for importing fertilizer for the cropping season is already done. In many of our countries where the deals are tender-based, a lot of the discussions and transactions and orders are done in the last quarter of the preceding year or into the very early part of the new year, so that producers and suppliers start organizing to send products to the country. So a lot of these deals were already done and orders have been placed, and it was just a matter of shipment into the country. And so I think that was one thing that didn't allow the impact to be huge in West Africa fertilizer value chain. The second one is the fact that when the pandemic was declared, or when the issue started, it didn't start in West Africa. You remember it started in China, and then the new cases where big issues started to come included Europe and then America. Now, before we started seeing index cases in West Africa, we had seen the responses of other parts of the world. So we had the chance to learn, as it were, how they are responding, and then just be waiting for when we see a sign and then start responding the same way. I'm not absolutely sure that the case would have been exactly the same if it had started in West Africa. The third one is the fact that because it's seen the impact or the way it was ravaging in the countries where it had begun, we were ready to respond, and therefore our responses were quick. I remember the consultation between WAFA and ECOWAS to be able to push for this generalization of fertilizer as essential commodity across West Africa. Was a matter of 1 to 2 days, and that information was already in the hands of all the countries, and people were executing right there and then. So that was very quick response. I think these three things helped to limit the impact. But when I think about this, there's the feeling and the evidences that had this pandemic struck at a slightly different time, the impact would have been a bit more severe than we had seen. And that kind of suggests that we need to check how resilient we are as a sub-region, as the fertilizer sector in the sub-region, to withstand such shock should it happen, at the time. For example, if it had happened, let's say, at the end of the third quarter into the beginning of the fourth quarter, when we are supposed to be discussing fertilizer supplies and placing these orders, or right in the heart of the actual cropping season, which is between May and June. You notice that in the chart I've shown you, by the time we're getting to May and June timeframe, it started to come down gradually, and countries were already, allowing people to start to go towards the farms already. Plus the fact that a lot of the lockdown was more implemented in urban centers and to a limited extent in rural centers where actual farming does happen across West Africa. So thinking about all of this, we think there is a need to have a strategic approach across West Africa to building the capacity of the fertilizer sector to respond to shocks in the future. And some of the ideas that we've been thinking about is there should be a structure where countries, or even within the sub-region, we can keep what we call buffer stock of fertilizer, such that should there be a situation that hinders us from being able to import, where we are importing especially the phosphates and the potash, which is more often than not imported from outside of West Africa, we would have enough stock to serve our needs before the pandemic winds down. So that's one idea that we've been thinking about. And then we're also saying it's important to improve regional integration, so that movement of products from one country to another becomes easier, so that in the course, should there be any such shock in the future, the ability to use whatever resources available within the sub-region to meet the needs while we're overcoming that shock is better and easier to accomplish. And of course, to do this, financing mechanisms are definitely key. If you look at the strategic objectives of WAFA that I presented in my area, I think it's in the second slide, getting appropriate financing for the sector is a huge part of that. And therefore, we think that this is also iterating the key need to look at finding solutions to the lack of appropriate finance for the fertilizer sector, which to a large extent limits supplies of sufficient volumes of fertilizer across the sub-region. So these are some of the lessons that we've learned. And so I thought with these few slides of mine, I kind of give a group a high-level view, and then open the floor for the conversation, and let's see what the specific responses from each of the countries we have on board today would be, and get some information from there. So thank you so much for your time. I hope I haven't gone beyond my 20 minutes. Thank you. That's my presentation there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kuke, for that detailed and very interesting presentation. Killian, where are the questions from? I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Where are the questions for Dr. Kuke?
I can safely say we have got one person that is coming from Saweda, Liverpool.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's a question or it's a compliment. Should I read it?
Oh, I see there's a question at the end. Yeah, I can go ahead and read it. That's fine.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
So, Dr. Saweda Liverpool Tasi, she says, thank you for the excellent presentation, Dr. Kuke. For some fieldwork done in Nigeria, from some fieldwork we have done in Nigeria, we hear a common complaint from farmers about the availability and cost of fertilizer in the farming season, as well as challenges with accessing labor, which also then affects their agricultural production and investment. We also hear that with limited opportunities for non-farm activities and associated cash flow for fertilizer demand. But however, you indicate that the sector was not so affected in terms of the supply side, but what have you seen on the demand side?
Okay, so thank you very much for that excellent question, Dr. Liverpool Tese. So first of all, on the response that you get from the field work you've done in Nigeria, I think, like I did allude to, Nigeria had a point where it suffered a bit of scarcity, significant scarcity actually, and that kind of led to high prices. I even could note that there were times where prices were more than 120% higher than they would usually be during the cropping season. And this is pretty much scarcity driven because all the NPKs were locally blended in Nigeria, and all these NPKs were blended using urea that was locally manufactured, and this urea was not available during that time frame. So for both the NPKs and the urea, the farmers couldn't access it because one of the plants that should be producing urea was shut down for over a month because of the COVID-19 related fatality. The second one had operational challenges and wasn't producing as well during that time frame. So that's what I think led to that. Once production resumed, they tried to clear the backlog. Prices started adjusting downwards back. And so that's also what leads to access issues. But the other factor, though, is there is significant control of the structure for producing and distributing fertilizer in Nigeria by the government scheme that is called Presidential Fertilizer Initiative, which is driven by Nigeria's Sovereign Investment Agency, who basically is the only organization that is allowed by some restriction implemented by the central bank to import fertilizer raw materials that come from outside of Nigeria. And they then in turn distribute by allocation to vendors. And the efficiency of their importation and distribution wasn't the best, left a lot to be desired. And this kind of slowed down also operations of the blenders and the ability to distribute product to the market. So this is where things that kind of pushed prices and access challenges that we saw in the market. Now on the demand side, so I mean, obviously for prices to rise when people for prices to rise because people cannot find a product, it shows you that the demand was actually there. The problem was scarcity. I do know people who waited for more than 2 months, even 3 months, to receive products that they ordered for, and they paid in advance. We also were involved in some engagement with some of our fellow blending partners who needed to supply us products, and products that had been paid for, but because they couldn't receive raw material, it took them more than 2 months to be able to deliver products that was needed in the heart of the season. So yes, there was some scarcity, and that made it difficult to really. I think demand actually outstripped the supply especially during that scarcity time. I don't know whether that kind of answers the question properly, but yeah.
There are other two questions for you, I think, before we release you, Dr. Dr. Cook.
Okay, that's fine. You want me to read the questions and just address them, or you want to read them too? I can read them. I actually have them.
You can read them from your end. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, Solomon Galacha Woyasa. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce the names correctly. You're asking if there are real fertilizer subsidy programs in West African countries, and they need to explain. Yes, in some West African countries there are fertilizer subsidy programs. One big example is Ghana, and I think our colleague from Ghana, Ghana's Planting for Food and Jobs, would explain how the program works. And I know in response to COVID-19, they actually expanded the volume of products that were subsidized for farmers on that program. In Nigeria, it's not called a subsidy. The Presidential Fertilizer Initiative, it's an attempt not to directly pay part of the price of fertilizer for farmers, but to have a system of using economics of scale in importing inputs so that prices can be lower. But then prices are still regulated and fixed by the government on that program. And because of, in response to COVID-19, the government added an additional 20% subsidy, I would say. So instead of selling one bag of the fertilizer, they blend at their fixed price of 5,500. It then was recommended for sale at 5,000, which is 20% kind of less. So those are two examples of the kind of subsidy program that goes on in some of West African countries. So the shape and mode vary from one country to another in West Africa. And your other question, Solomon, is that what is the driving force for local production of fertilizer in Nigeria? And is that, and you're correct to think that this is primarily because of availability of raw material. The policies are also favorable for the investments because, for example, the principal raw material for urea manufacture is natural gas. The price point for natural gas is significantly competitive in the Nigerian environment. And alternatively, natural gas was to a large extent fled in the petroleum extraction industry before fertilizer manufacturing, before urea manufacturing became a major practice in Nigeria. Therefore, manufacturing urea in itself is also an environmental positive, also has an environmental positive in terms of trapping and using the natural gas that would have been flared in manufacturing product that can be used. Another drive, another impetus, another incentive for that is the fact that the West African market is a growing market. Africa, everybody agrees, is the next frontier for expansion of fertilizer use and expansion of agricultural yields and contribution to global food security. So having the natural resource to produce a product that is needed in that sector in the sub-region then suggests that there's a market opportunity to leverage onto. Okay, so there's a question for Mehari. So what is the current estimated market value for fertilizer in this sub-region? Today, West Africa consumes about 3.5 million tons of fertilizer. So you can do the numbers if you do that, like an average of $350 to $400 per metric ton delivered cost. But that's current over the last three years or so average. But there's a potential to triple that in the sub-region to hit over 10 million metric ton. So that's what the volumes are looking like.
Thank you.
To join.
Thank
you, Baba Robert. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okuku. There will be a question and answer session. I think
we can keep other questions to that point, right?
Yeah, people can continue dropping in their questions, and we'll be processing them. And I think there will be. Let's give a chance to
the other speakers.
To the other speakers. Over to you, Dr. Wanzala.
Thank you, Killian. And thank you again, Dr. Kuke, for that very interesting keynote address. Our next speaker is Mr. Richard Tomasi Ankra. He's the head of Planting for Food and Jobs Secretariat, Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Ghana. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to appreciate you for giving me this opportunity to make a short presentation on Ghana's fertilizer value chain. Elia, can the organizer help me to share my screen so that I'll give a brief listing on that?
Hi, Jim.
You should be able to share it right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can you see the share screen button on the bottom?
The green one?
Toolbar, yep.
Or I can share it from this end if you don't mind. Hello, Mr. Tomasi.
Hello, yeah, can I go on?
Yes, to share your screen, do you see the green button at the bottom? There's a menu bar. Yes.
Good. Yeah, so thank you very much once again. Yeah, because of the time given, just short, brief talking points. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see your screen. Let me share it for you. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you see my screen now?
Oh, not yet.
We can see it.
Yep. You can see it.
I can see it too.
Okay, yeah.
So you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I go on. We are looking at the fertilizer value chain, first by looking at the supply chain that we have in the country. I hope you can hear me. Yeah. So we are talking about the upstream and downstream distribution, but because Ghana is a net, hello, can you hear me? Ghana is a net importer of fertilizers. We are very much particular about those actors in the downstream because the producers we import from other countries, and then we so if there had been any impact, then we're looking at the fertilizer trading, where we have exporters, that those who are making it available in the export market, and then those that are importing, who are our major partners as far as the ministry is concerned. And then when it has gotten in country, then the local trading and the local traders are paying this thing. But ultimately, as the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, our ultimate farmers, our ultimate clients are the farmers. Yeah. So next, yeah. So I'll be talking about 3 and 4 activities. Yeah, because those who supply the raw materials for companies to produce, and those producing countries, companies are outside our distance. But those that are exporting into Ghana and those that are importing into Ghana, and the local traders and distributors and retailers who are in direct contact with our farmers. When the pandemic broke up, there were few restrictions that had to be put in place. Ghana had our first case in March, middle of March, and a lot of things that were put in place, which include quarantining people and physical and social distancing. And there was partial lockdown in places where the outbreak was very high. And we also had land, sea, and air borders that were closed. So based on these restrictions that was put in place in Ghana, we were anticipating that some effects will emerge. For instance, trade uncertainties caused by import and export restrictions on goods. But I think Dr. Ukulu has already indicated that fertilizers were actually seen as an essential commodity, so that the restrictions did not affect it so much. Apart from that, we in Ghana, like he mentioned earlier, are also implementing a subsidy program, because when this government came to power from 2017, we realized that the fertilizer use in the country was very low, in fact, averaging about 8 kg per hectare. And therefore, that kind of strategy of the subsidy had to be implemented. So by so doing, we started our ordering processes quite early in August the previous year, and all the processes had been completed. And normally we are expecting that suppliers and distributors are able to supply the fertilizers by February the next year, even though we have 2 seasons in some parts of the country and 1 season in some parts of the country. Those that have 2 seasons, the major cropping time starts in April, May, thereabout. And that's for the May season. And then the minor season starts in August. But for the northern sector, there is only 1 season, and their main cropping starts around May, June, July. So we had already finished ordering any fertilizers that we needed as at that time, except that some of them were not in the country at that time. Other effect that can also be, we can think that can affect other actors with expensive trade spaces, which we thought could maybe affect fertilizer prices. And limited access to, we thought that it was also going to affect farmers processing and labor shortages from expanding their farms, restrictions from expansion, and artificial shortage of fertilizer were anticipated. And speculations by retailers, some of them withdrawing their working capital and therefore making working capital shortage and things like that. So we have been examining the impact of COVID in respect of some of these possible effects. And the government put in place a lot of mitigation measures. The first one is to enhance access to inputs, basically fertilizer as we are talking about now. Then we look at timeliness of access, timeliness of arrival, timeliness where the farmers, when they want it, they are able to access, and availability in substantial quantities, and ensure affordable prices. As is already mentioned, Ghana, we're having a 50% subsidy on fertilizer, and expanding the distribution network. Before a company can be given work to do to be part of the distribution system, this company should have a lot of outlets within the farming communities. So it's part of our evaluation process where there should be linked outlets who will be distributing your products. And then if that happens, then it means the fertilizer goes to where the farmer is able to access the fertilizer without so much hassling. And then the other intervention was that since people had some of their working capital locked up, there has been a kind of COVID stimulus package to assist small and medium scale enterprises, especially like the outlets I'm talking about, to be able to operate and able to sell the fertilizers to the farmers. So the ordering, like I said, was far ahead of the emergence of COVID, and therefore we were sure of availability of fertilizer in the country before the COVID. In fact, we had given companies authorization to supply the fertilizers before we found our first outbreak. So next screen, please. Yeah. So in doing so, we also have 16 regions in Ghana, and we have a way of trying to track the fertilizer sales that's going on in the country and see what farmers actually had programs in assessing fertilizers. If you look at the left side, we have a northern region, which is one of the largest regions in the Savannah zone. And the country, too, in this, for the 2020 cropping season, the government was subsidizing a total of 421,000 metric tons of fertilizers. So every region they receive, it's not a quota, but the distributors send them to the outlets as and when they think that the supply in this area is. So the northern region, if you see the block on the left side, the northern region receives 79% of NPK and 21% of urea. And the supply to this particular region started in the 3rd week of April, because we have a system where the regional administration office certifies every input, waybills of every input that enters a particular region. So we are able to track when input starts entering a particular region. And the 3rd week in April, fertilizers started going to the northern region. We are using the areas time of entry as but not all of them actually went at that time, but it was spread over the season. And you see that fertilizer uptake by farmers started in the 3rd week and then the 4th week, but the quantities were very low, 783 metric tons, increasing up in May to 3,131 tons. So you see that the season and the time of application determines when the farmers take up the fertilizers from the outlets. And the peak uptake, that 49% of the total fertilizer that have gone into the season. In fact, this one is up to August, and we're still collecting data. I'm just citing this one as a case of what we are doing. So the total quantity of fertilizer that has gone into that region, the highest uptake was in August, because they normally seed in the last week of June and then sometime in July. So you see that the trend, this suggests that the time of the supply and the time of the farmers assessing fertilizer was in good time, because it was not delayed. So the timeliness issue is addressed. The farmers got the fertilizers at the time that they needed them. So accessibility has been addressed, and then it's available and it's affordable because they have some kind of subsidy being put on by the government. The next one is another region, which is also in the Savannah zone. Can I look at the last slide, please? Yeah. So in this particular region, you see that the fertilizer supply actually entered that region in June, the first entry, and within that same week, there is uptake. So, but it started slowly, also peaking in August and slowing down a little bit in September. They don't have minor season, so we are still collecting the data, but I believe because they have irrigation facilities for dry season, this will continue to time. But before this particular, the distribution or the sales from June up to September. But we are saying that once the entry of the input was earlier than required, earlier than the season and the time the farmers are in, then we say that the COVID actually did not have much impact on the fertilizer distribution in this particular year, 2020 cropping season. If the fertilizer went to the northern sector in June, we have the other regions, but I picked this particular one because we have enough data to substantiate. Those who started their season, that the southern sector, which started the season in April, got their fertilizers, because normally the distributors will distribute these fertilizers in the southern sector before they start supplying the northern sector, whose season is a little bit later in the year. So based on the interventions that have been put in place by government, the outlets were the people that we thought could be affected, because the distributors actually want them to make some payments before they give them the surprise. And then the COVID stimulus that's being given to small scale, you apply only when you think that you need that kind of capital to be able to work. So these are the mitigation measures, and I think this particular year has gone on very well, and the COVID did not have much toll on agriculture in Ghana this year. But following up, after following up the input uptake and all those things, we are also doing an assessment from farmers' fields. We're doing what we call the crop cutting studies to see whether the results of yields and output is going to is also going to be affected in case there was any hitch anywhere, because maybe farmers were unable to have, say, because in the beginning of every season, we expect some labor movements, especially those from the north who have not started their season. Some of them come to the south to assist in land preparation and things like that. So we're looking at all these things and looking at the areas covered and things like that and see. But for now, from our view, we think that COVID did not have much toll on agriculture, but harvesting and other things are ongoing, and we're going to assess production and yields and see the effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive presentation. I see we have some questions in French. Maybe we can be assisted with translation.
Yes, I will need translation.
Hi, Doc. Can we take the last presentation and we do we do the question and answer session.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's fine.
I believe the question in French is just to ask if we will share the recording for people who have joined late, which will.
Oh, okay. Yes, we will definitely share the recording with all the participants. I do see another question here, but I think as Killian has indicated, we'll keep all the questions until the end, if that's okay. Thank you very much. And let's have our final presentation from Mr. Sunday Okay. He's from the Department of Farm Input Support Services, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, Nigeria. Mr. Okay, over to you, please.
Thank you very much for having me here. Let me quickly open my presentation and see how I can share it. Can you see my screen now? Hello?
We cannot see your screen yet.
All right.
If you have got a problem, Mr. Sunday, I can share it from this end.
All right, maybe you can do that.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello, I'm just sharing.
No, can you see? I've done something. Check if you can see it from there now.
Okay, let me see. Oh, all right. You can go ahead.
Are we good to go now?
Kindly put it on slideshow. Click on slideshow. Just on top there, I can't see there. Just go on top of the screen. Where your mouse is up, where the slideshow is.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, you see where your cursor is now?
Yeah.
Just go up there, the slideshow. You see where your cursor is now?
Now?
Where your cursor is, just if you go up the slideshow there. Can I share it for you, Mr. Okay? Hi, Mr. Sander. Hello, Mr. Sander.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Can you stop sharing and I can share it for you from this end?
All right.
Sure. Can you see it now? Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see.
Go ahead, Mr. Sander.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Okay Sunday, as you have rightly introduced. I work with the Farm Input Support Services Department. The department is actually in charge of fertilizer, the country. Yeah, Nigeria, just like every other African countries, have majority of their population living in the rural areas and depend on agriculture for their livelihood. And a lot of these populations are purely into subsistence farming, which means they depend mainly on cropping, fisheries, and livestock production for their daily livelihood. And while we recognize agriculture as the pillar of Nigeria's economic diversification, our economic growth and recovery plan, its growth has been unimpressive, and farmers' income barely meets their daily need. This is exactly why, frankly speaking, the COVID-19 threatened the food security of the country by the sudden cessation of supply of critical food items, more especially the ones brought from outside the country. However, government, by way of response, quickly had to inject food release from the pre-existing grain reserves for consumption by the people. So this helped in meeting the food need of the people within this period of the lockdown. But why am I taking about agriculture generally? We understand that fertilizer is a critical input to increases in agricultural production. So whatever affects fertilizer supply will definitely affect food supply in the country. Yes, within the period of the lockdown, the fertilizer value chain in the country was heavily affected negatively. For instance, the issue of transportation and distribution of already produced fertilizers in the country. Yes, they are produced in the various manufacturing plants, but we couldn't even transport them within that period. And I want you to understand at this point that even before the COVID-19, yes, there had already been a restriction on the movement of fertilizers, particularly urea, within the country. This was actually necessitated by the observation of the inclusion of urea and other nitrate-based fertilizers in the production of IEDs, improvised explosive devices, by the insurgent group in the country. So the Office of the National Security Advisor had to place restriction on the movement of urea, more especially to the northeastern part of the country, where the insurgent group were operating. So you see, this had already posed a problem in the distribution of fertilizer even before the COVID-19 pandemic. It's also, the pandemic also affected production, not just distribution alone. Production plants were forced to shut down. Just like the vice president of WAFA said, one of the major urea manufacturing company in the country had to shut down because one of his staff was infected, and they had to shut down production. And again, there's this central arrangement for procurement of raw materials for blending of NPK into the country. I want to state here that the government of Nigeria is implementing an intervention in the fertilizer sector, and it is called Presidential Fertilizer Initiative. It is an initiative where the National Sovereign Investment Authority, one of the government agencies, is actually responsible for the procurement of raw materials at economic scale, DAP, MOP, and that they distribute them to blending plants for local blending of NPK fertilizers. So you see, we depend mainly on the imported raw materials for the production of the NPK. We source our urea locally. So, but because of this COVID-19 pandemic, there was a little scarcity within that period. So we couldn't, the plants, even though some of them were having urea, but they couldn't go ahead to blend because there was no DAP and MOP. So the importation of raw materials and blending materials were stalled due to COVID-19 lockdown. This generated gross deficiency of fertilizer supply in the country, leading to very high in price of fertilizer in the period. More especially, and again, it came within the period of peak demand for fertilizers, within the peak of our farming season in the country. So it affected us seriously. There are other blending plants in the country, they had to shut down. In fact, as a matter of fact, workers were relieved of their job. So it was a very critical time for us. But in the midst of all this, yes, government tries taking interventions within the period. For instance, the first thing that was done was the presidency. In his speech on COVID-19 presented to the nation, I think it should be on 13th of April, they directed with the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, then the Office of the National Security Advisor, the Vice Chairman of the National Food Security Council, we have a National Security Council in the country, to work with the Presidential Task Force on how to lift, or rather ease the restriction on the transportation and movement of food items and agricultural inputs within the country. Yes, I know WAFA, like the Vice President said. Yeah, there are some of the information they circulated within the period. We are privy to it. In addition to the suggestion or recommendation from WAFA, the country quickly had to go to that. So now the minister had a meeting with the presidential task force on COVID-19 and other stakeholders, the security stakeholders. And the government quickly lifted the ban, or rather the restriction on the movement of fertilizers and other key farm inputs, including farm food items within the country. So that was, yes, that was part of the interventions. Again, the federal government of Nigeria also effected a reduction in the price of the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative from 5,500 naira per bag to 5,000 naira. It was a 500 naira reduction as a way of cushioning the effect of the COVID-19. The Federal Minister of Agriculture also launched the distribution of fertilizer to farmers as palliatives to COVID-19. Yes, currently the distribution is taking place in 2 states. The next phase of it is expected to come up. And as part of the responses to the COVID-19 lockdown, we quickly had to conduct fertilizer market prices although we know that there was a general price hike. Hello? 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 Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Sorry, I think the French translator interrupted, but we can hear you perfectly. Please proceed.
All right. So as a department in charge of fertilizer, on our own, we quickly had to conduct fertilizer market price survey across the region. There was no uniform pricing. We had different prices range for the northern part of the country. We had different price range for the southern part of the country. But in all, we had to conduct market price to find out the effect of price of the COVID-19 to price changes. Let me also state here that as part of the measures to cushioning the effect of this, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture started a working visit to majority of the urea manufacturing plant in the country, at least a major urea manufacturing plant in the country, at least to find a way of guiding against the occurrence of same maybe in the next cropping season. The essence of the visit was to find out the effective operating capacity of the various plants, then so that we should be able to know what they can afford to produce within a certain period of time. And like what the WAFA Vice President said, we are thinking of actually going to fast stocking so that we can have to stockpile fertilizers before the season, so that in the event of anything in different locations, farmers will not have problem in accessing the fertilizers. And again, for us as a department, we are currently implementing the National Fertilizer Quality Control Law. Actually, the law is in response to the ECOWAS fertilizer regulation. So there are a lot of issues that are introduced in the law as a way of capturing the statistics in the fertilizer sector. For instance, within the period, we discovered that there were places where they had stocks of fertilizer, but they refused to release it. So, but before we knew, it was already late. So now, by the provisions of the Act, you are under compulsion for every month to declare the stock of fertilizers you have and the stock of raw materials. Officially, failure to do that will not amount to, is an offense under the Act. And what is the relevance of this? The relevance is that we should be able at every point in time to understand or determine the stocks of fertilizers and raw materials available so that we can afford to project that within this period and this, we should be able to have this quantum of fertilizers. And then we can use that to make some analysis and some policy decisions. So this is exactly what the government did within the period. I want us to understand the fact that though PFI is not implemented like a subsidy program, no, it's not a direct subsidy program, but it is also an intervention of the government in the sector, aimed at least securing the raw materials at a cheaper rate so that the price of fertilizers can afford to come down a little for the farmers. However, from my perspective, we are still of the opinion that governments of Africa or West Africa should do more. And as we are advocating for saving our country. Why? That is the area we have comparative advantage, agricultural production. It's a matter of looking at it from the perspective of opportunity cost. The cost of forex on importation of food and the cost of injection of money as subsidy into the fertilizer sector to increase food production and reduce importation. So when we do analysis from this perspective, it will help to put governments of different governments of West Africa on the kind of decision they will need to do in order to support the fertilizer sector. This is practically what we've been able to achieve within this period. There are other things coming up, but well, maybe we don't need to share it at this point until they begin to materialize. Thank you very much. And I'll open to some questions.
Okay. Before Dr. Wanzala introduced our last presenter from Togo, I just want to check with Yannick, our translator, because most of the guys on this platform, they are English speaking, and he was translating to French. I don't know how we should do it. Should we turn on our interpretation? Yannick, can you hear me? Hello, Yannick.
Yannick, can you switch back to English, please? Yes, we can hear you now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Yemen.
Hello.
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 Oh, okay.
Bonjour.
We are fine, and you?
I'm fine, and you?
Great.
Sorry for being late. I was waiting for the link.
Okay. We are all trying. It's a new normal. So, are you able to share your screen, or we should share it for you?
Let me try. Is it okay?
Yes, put it on slideshow.
Okay.
So,
okay now?
Yes, it's okay. Dr. Wanzala, you can introduce Mr. Yemen.
Okay. Is everybody set as far as translation? People know what to do?
Yannick has changed the interpretation to English. But now I think he has gone back to French, because we are speaking in English.
Okay, so we can proceed.
So we can proceed. Mr. Yemen, you can present in French. Our interpreter is ready
Okay.
to interpret.
Wonderful. So let me just quickly introduce Monsieur Herman Ezike. He's an agroeconomist with the Ministry of Agriculture from Togo. So welcome, Monsieur. Please proceed.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello.
Bonjour, we can hear you well.
Ok. D'accord. Merci beaucoup vraiment pour l'opportunité que vous nous offrez pour partager sur...
Thank you for the opportunity that you have allowed or given us for us to share our experience in view of COVID-19 in the year 2020.
Just one more housekeeping issue here. All participants go on the interpretation button and change it to English.
Is it possible to ask Mr. Ehrman to go a bit slowly, because he's going a bit faster?
Can I go ahead? Hello.
Hello.
Oui, je peux aller sur... Okay. Hello. I'm waiting for you. Can I go
yes,
ahead?
All participants, sorry, monsieur. All the participants, please look at the bottom of your screen. Those various icons where there's mute, there's video, Q&A.
It might be more productive to maybe ask, like, you know, what adjustments or additions are needed to the way, you know, we've laid out the plan for this group, so that it doesn't devolve into a discussion of the old research work group and how it was run.
Okay. Okay, I'm not sure who was speaking there. But if people look at the bottom of their screen, there's an icon there that says interpretation. Select the English, and then you will hear
modifications or
interpretation in English.
additions to the
Thank
process.
you.
So go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much.
Nous vous remercions pour l'opportunité que
I
vous
say
avez.
thank you for the opportunity that you have given us to share the experience in order for us to ameliorate our prestation on the impact of COVID on the chain value of the fertilizer. For Togo, we'll say, compared to other countries of the world, Togo is one of the countries that experienced the sanitary crisis of COVID-19. To face this pandemic, the government took some restrictions, like COVID, in order for them to reduce the impact on the value chain of the fertilizers, especially on the agriculture sector. A strategy has been.
Yeah, I don't know. Melissa said this earlier that the point of the meeting at this point is really just.
There are 8 avenues which were developed, and all those were based on the entry of the fertilizers. At the level, we worked hard to see what could be done to reduce impact of COVID-19 and avoid that producers may fall into poverty. In view of the impact that we have observed all along the campaign, firstly, in view of the importers of the fertilizers, we have noticed that their financial capacity has been affected, especially the bank, which were supposed to help them out.
Nous avons noté un impact limité sur le transport à l'intérieur, ceci par rapport aux mesures restrictives, mais spécialement pour les gros camions et autres. Le gouvernement a pris des dispositions pour qu'ils puissent librement circuler, mais sauf qu'il ne faut pas qu'il y ait beaucoup de personnes à bord, 2 personnes au maximum. On a noté aussi au niveau des
opérations
portuaires un ralentissement des activités, surtout à partir de 22h à 6h.
Slow movement around 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. because coffee was starting from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. Therefore, circulation was limited. In view of the distribution of the fertilizers, we noticed a weak distribution of the fertilizers, especially in terms of the market. There was limitation in different zones and regions. Related to the producers, as COVID was there, there was limitation in terms of the market. There were fertilizers which were coming from other borders. We mentioned Benin and Ghana or Togo. We have observed 2 aspects. Firstly, according to the capacity of the actors, we had meetings in order for us to motivate them, to express to them the different measures which were taken by the government. especially under financing, which will help them stabilize their work, helping them to mobilize their finance. With that, we could not really mobilize people, despite the fact that the government gathered more than 100,000 fertilizers for the campaign. In Togo, the state decided to back off in view of fertilizers in the territories of some part of the country. Therefore, we approached some partners in order to support distributors, and that tried to help us put together a strategy that would burn competition between us, and that allowed us to reduce the cost. Along the campaign, we paid 1,000 lower than what was supposed to be paid, which means 46% lower than earlier. There were different movements in the country in order for us to have different kind of fertilizers and for us to also appreciate the fertilizer we have in the country. Because the government gave in to the private sectors, specifically to producers. Since we say that they have a limited capacity, so we approach them with some strategies. Mobile approach that we acquired in 2016. This year, to face COVID, we tried digitalization with all the actors. We set in place a platform, a digital platform, through which we sent a time of 90,000 francs for each actors for them acquire the fertilizers. Notably sent 35,000 for them to benefit. That gave them the ability to commit themselves in order for them to buy quantity at the end of the year. As soon as they buy, they are going to pay back the loan that they had at the bank. And the remaining part they're going to send to the producer. That's what they help us to develop and facilitate the access to producer all along the campaign. They're going to be selected by the distributors. They'll be sent to the department in charge. And the department is going to pass the loan to their producers. So the loan given to the aggregators helps them to take or to receive the fertilizers and the remaining part to be thrown or to be sent to the producers. So to carry all this process, it took us so much time. So we started this on the 28th of July. It took us a month to taste it. And we judged that it was efficient. And because of that, we said, oh, we're going to carry on with this process even for the coming campaign. And we're going to start registering in the month of December and January in order for the campaign to start in the month of March, so that all the producers may benefit of this digital platform. So to facilitate the loan process from the bank, we need to set everything in order for them to have a private access through the exercise that we have. So far, we have registered 19 aggregators.
Près de 515 producteurs qui ont pu acheter les intrants et faire le labour à partir de cette plateforme électronique que nous avons expérimentée et dont nous
From this platform which we have experienced for the exercise for the year 2021, so that the loan may be accessible to the producers and distributors. To the distribution to take place easily. Behold the experience that we had through the exercise we had of a month, simply to try to reduce the effect of COVID. Two strategies were set to respond to the impact of COVID. So to respond to the capacity, we have set in place the electronic process of loan in order for us to reduce the effect of COVID on the fertilizers, in order for us to have a necessary interaction in the field so that the producers and distributors may be able to access the work. We are available for so many questions that you have in view of what you've explained. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yemen. We have been actually collecting all your questions, and we'll be running them shortly. And Michelle will be sharing your screen. May you kindly stop sharing your screen, Mr. Yemen?
Okay.
So I think some of the questions have been answered during the course of the webinar. Will be, oh, there it goes. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Killian. I think we can just take these questions as they arise in the interests of time. So the first question is to Dr. Okuku. Oh, wait, oops. Okay, we're taking questions for Killian, can I proceed?
Yeah.
Okay. So these questions are for Mr. Sunday. Okay. First question from your survey data analysis. Do your findings justify that the current centralized fertilizer raw material procurement by the NSIA and the sole control of MPK by the PFI? Do you see that as being effective to satisfy the fertilizer need in Nigeria?
Well, the answer is yes and no. First of all, it is no because we are still having some glitches, and that there's no policy that is static. Government said the only way they can intervene in the sector is by way of securing the central procurement of raw materials. I want to understand at this point that the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Federal Ministry of Finance, under financial policy and monetary policy, had already stopped the issuance of forex for procurement of fertilizer and fertilizer raw materials. So if we allow the private companies, fertilizer companies, to go and secure forex from the open market in order to import raw materials, that is going to be a suicidal issue because the price of fertilizers at the end of the day is going to be very high. Then on the other hand, I try to respond to some of these questions as I receive them on the screen. government is already rejigging the structure of PFI to include all duly certified blending companies in the country. Why they excluded some before now was the fact that they were still trying to experiment. So, but now that we have a fertilizer law, it is our responsibility to take government that these are the duly certified fertilizer blending companies in the country. And discussions are already going around this area, so that all duly certified fertilizer blending companies can be buying their raw materials from NSIA. With that, nobody is going to be excluded from the program.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Ankra. Let's give Mr. Sunday. Let's give Mr. Ankra an opportunity to respond to a couple of questions. Killian, do you have some questions there for Mr. Ankra?
So I think he has touched on the first question. The second question is right on your screen. Can't you see it?
No, I was saying, is this from Mr. Ankra? I was saying, can we move on to get a couple of questions from Mr. Ankra in the interest of time?
Okay. Michelle, can you move? Can you let the Mentimeter move?
One question, Mr. Ankra, while they're organizing the Mentimeter, is that you said Ghana is a net importer of fertilizer. Does Ghana produce fertilizer? And if so, what type of fertilizer does it produce?
No, please. Actually, I think maybe the statement. Ghana does not produce fertilizer, but we have a number of large companies that import raw materials and do several formulations for fit to different agro crops and then different agro ecologies. But not necessarily. The OCP is yet to set up a fertilizer plant in Ghana, which is probably, yeah, but for now, just the raw material for some of them to blend up.
Okay. Michelle, can you stop moving the Mentimeter? Move it down, please. There's a question there I wanted to pick up. Move it down. Michelle? No, the first column. Yeah, the first column, bring it down. Yes, just stop there. So this is a question I think that could be asked to Mr. It's directed to Dr. Okuku, but it can also be answered by the other panelists. It's a question around quality control. So for Nigeria, what is being done to correct the defect which may arise with which we have one product that is serving all purposes? Example, in Nigeria, it's MPK 15-15-15 or 20-10-10. And then 46 urea for top dressing. If we could get an answer to the question of quality control and blanket fertilizers from all the panelists, I think that would be very useful. Starting with Dr. Okeke, please.
All right. Number one is that I wouldn't want to make a bogus statement by saying Nigeria is the first country. No, I would rather say that the country had to ban, the first thing we did was to ban the importation of MPK 15-15-15 as a way of discouraging the use of blanket fertilizer formulations in the country. As a matter of fact, this is one of the issues that also led to local production of MPK 20-10-10, plus some other secondary elements and micronutrients. Now, there was a soil survey that was conducted, but in a little while. We only produced the first aspect of formulation, comprised of MPK 20-10, then MPK 25, plus secondary and micronutrients, as a takeoff. Now, currently, there are a lot of research is ongoing in different sectors, in different agroecological regions of the country. In fact, OCP is championing so many of them. Indorama, as a urea manufacturing company, is also involved, and so many other fertilizer companies. Agra is also undertaking a lot of work in that aspect, soil crop-specific fertilizer formulation. This is what is currently going on in the country. So the 2010 you will be seeing now, there's no 15-15-15. We don't encourage it absolutely. So if you see pockets of it, there are individuals that have commercial farm who insist that their farm, they have done this is for them. But if it is for sale in the open market, we farm heavily at that. So we are in the verge of developing site and crop-specific fertilizer formulation. So that before we get here, we said we need to start from somewhere through the production of 2010 with inclusion of secondary elements and micronutrients. So it is a project that is currently going. Although we are not yet here, but we have taken a very bold step. Then, on the issue of fertilizer quality control, the country, in line with the Equal Fertilizer Regulation, has put in place a very robust fertilizer quality control act in the country, which we are currently implementing. Unfortunately, I am also working in the fertilizer quality control division. I was also involved in the development and establishment of the regulatory system. So, one, we would have started registering and fresh registration of all fertilizer players in the country. But in line with best international practices, we don't want to be doing manual registration. Currently, we have finished developing our portal, a web portal for online registration and monitoring of fertilizer quality control activities in the country. So, and again, we advise the industry players to belong to association for self-regulation. It will help us better as a department to work with the association than to work with individual actors in the industry. So right now I'm speaking with you. I am behind a hall where we are having a workshop with security operatives in the country who are going to collaborate with us in the enforcement of the law. So I had to pull out from the meeting to attend to this meeting now. So very shortly, that's going to be a thing of the past. We are greatly addressing that. Did I miss any?
No, I think they're quite comprehensive. Can we hear a quick answer from Mr. Ankra?
Yes, well, I think on fertilizer quality assurance, yes, I think Ghana has mechanisms to check that. Actually, we have our plant and protection regulatory services staff at the ports. And when fertilizer is imported, before they even bag them, they take samples. And there are laboratories which have been set up in some zones in the country, Accra and the northern sector, where the test is done to look at the elements, the minerals that are in each of the brands that we have. And like he said, I also in a workshop outside Accra now, I had to work out to be able to participate in this and where we are looking at all the regulations and how to perfect them. And as part of checking, especially if you want to participate in the government subsidy program, you have to bid. And one of the things that the evaluators will have to look at is a certificate that you have your fertilizer samples been taken, and then you have been given a certificate of quality, good quality, which is part of the document that you submit before you are given a quota to supply. So Ghana is very much where we have been assisted by USAID and some AGRA and others to set up these laboratories to check on the fertilizers. Yeah, so quality assurance is very much checked. Thanks.
Thank you. If we can get a last response to the question from Monsieur Pezike. Any quality control issues in Togo and how do you deal with them? Thank you.
Thank you. Disons que par rapport à la réglementation de la CEDEAO qui avait prévu la mise en place des organes de contrôle au niveau national, il y a eu un arrêté qui est pris créant une structure nationale de contrôle qui est la centrale d'approvisionnement et de gestion des
controlling structure has been set with inspectors who were selected. There is a national laboratory of analysis, which is there just to make some researches in the national sector. So many of these exercises, inspectors were launched in the sector by the Minister of Agriculture to check in every workshop to have a sample of fertilizers that they have in. So the sample are sent to the Ultra for analysis in order for them to establish an accurate situation before sending the process in the country. So to say in brief, activities were launched, inspectors are in place in order for them to come up with different formulas in view of the fertilizers which are already in the field. There are different types of organic fertilizers. Some of them are in powder. But the methodology of inspection was not mastered. So they're still working on that in order for them to be helped. Because up to today, we are having some problem with organic fertilizers. It will be an opportunity for us to be helped to master the formula of the quality. But on fertilizers, we have already mastered everything on national sector. Beyond what I can say.
Hello?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Monsieur.
Merci.
I think I'd like to, at this stage, we've reached the end of, we've run out of time on our webinar. I would like to really take this opportunity to thank everybody who participated. Thank you so much for your participation, for your questions. And we will certainly send you the recordings and the presentation. Thank you so much. And please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you to the presenters especially. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Maria.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Maria.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.